In this demo, I will show you how to model a part using surfaces. We're going to use a simple mouse as a sample part. To start, I took a picture of the front view, the top view, and the right view, which I will use to reference in my actual part. This is what your final part is going to look like. Something like this. You can see I colored the surfaces. I also split it up into 6 different surfaces on each side, which I ultimately mirrored about the middle symmetric plane, which in this case is the right plane. And I will show you how I went about making this. So let's start a new part. And then what I'm going to do here is I need to make some sort of dimensions that I'm going to use to scale my pictures that I'm going to import. So I'm going to make a 3D sketch, which doesn't really belong to any singular plane, but I'm making this a 3D sketch so that I can have all of my dimensions in one sketch. So I measured this part beforehand. I know that the height of it is 38 millimeters. So in my front plane, I'm going to make this dimension 38. I'm going to add another dimension here for the width, which I know is 60 millimeters. And then holding down Shift and the arrow key, I'm going to rotate to my right plane, which I am going to make 100 millimeters for the length. Okay, so Control 7. These are our 3 dimensions that we're going to use to scale our pictures. So Control B, getting out of the sketch. I'm going to rename this sketch Dimensions just to make it easier. And now we have our dimensions laid down. So let's start dropping our pictures in. So in order to put a picture in here, I need to first be in a sketch. So let's start with our front plane. I'm going to start a new sketch on the front plane. And I'm going to go to Tools, Sketch Tools, Sketch Picture. And these are my reference pictures. Let's go to Front, just double click it. It drops it in for me. And I can basically just click and drag this part around now and scale it so that it fits my dimensions. So I'm going to eyeball this. It's not an exact science. So that looks about right. Maybe a little bit bigger. Okay, so that's about 38. I'm going to bring it up just so it fits within the constraints. There we go. So there's my first picture. I can also do other things here to fine tune it. I can change the angle if for some reason I took this picture off axis. And you can do other scaling things here or move it manually. I can also change the transparency. So I like to change my transparency by going to full image here on the left dialog box. And I make this about 0.6. It helps when you have this picture up because otherwise it gets a little bit too congested when you start making a lot of sketches. Lastly, this line here is a scaling line. So make sure this line fits within your picture. It'll help when you're trying to update your standard views so that everything scales properly. And you can just put an arbitrary number in there. Again, as long as it fits within your picture, you're in good shape. Okay, so click OK, and we have our first picture there. So that's what it looks like so far. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing for both of the other 2 sketches. Okay, so now I have all of my pictures imported, so now I can actually start making my part. The process I'm going to use here is I'm going to make a new sketch for every new line. I'm going to make all of my lines first, and then I'm going to make the surfaces which reference these lines. It's really important you make a new sketch for every new line you make because It's going to make your life a lot easier when you're actually referencing these sketches for surfaces. So what I'm going to start by doing here, as you saw in my final model, I only designed half of this part and then I mirrored it about the right plane. So I'm going to start by making this outer profile here. And I'm going to split this into 3 separate sections, roughly half the way down, another section here, and another section on the backside. So let's get started with that. So in my right plane, I'm going to make a new sketch, and I'm just going to use the spline tool, and I am going to go to about this point. I'm going to use my picture as a reference, and okay, so there's our first sketch. Great. Next up, we're going to do another one on our right plane. I'm going to have it connect at the point at which the other one left. And let's end it about there. And then I'm going to hold down Control, click the previous line I made, and make sure it's tangential so that there's a clean sweep amidst all of these, and it'll actually end up looking like one solid line. And the curve there kind of actually looks like my part already. So I'm gonna end this about here. And then I'm going to make one more sketch on the right plane. All the way to this red point. And let's see if I can get away with using only 2 points here. I'm gonna hold down Control, click my previous line, make sure it's tangential. And that looks like about follows the curve. Great. You'll notice here as I'm doing this that all of my lines, all my sketches are underdefined. And so far we've told you that everything you do should be fully defined. You'll notice for surfaces, they're a bit of an exception to the rule. So it's okay if your lines are underdefined for surfaces, since they're pretty freeform in nature. So you can add some other constraints here, like I want these to be vertical to one another because I'm going to ultimately end up putting a plane here. Okay, and then we have another line here. That's another sketch. And then the final sketch is going to go like this. So another constraint I can make for this angle, you can see in the left dialog box, I can control this angle here. So I want to make sure this is at 0 degrees so that it's tangential to my previous line. And then I can adjust these tangencies here so that it fits my curve a little better. Okay, so, that looks pretty good. So now we have a total, I'm going to hide our dimension sketch. We have 6 separate lines now that are kind of shaping the middle part of our plane here. This is going to be really helpful down the line, so that when I actually finish putting all my other lines in here, then I can just close this off and create a solid body from it, which is our ultimate goal when we're making surfaces. So now I'm going to start to add in some of the more complicated splines here. So let's start to shape out here and go into this other plane. So I'm going to use my front plane, and I'm going to use the spline tool again. This is that first point right here. This is in the front plane. And I'm going to bring this down to the red part, and then I'm just going to shape this a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's keep that. Oh, actually, if you look from the side now, it's a little bit different. So might be better to actually use this right view to dictate where this point ends. And this happens a lot where your part you think you're dragging it in a certain area, and then it just latches onto something else. So you're going to be flipping a lot between these different planes. So let's have this come down here. This is getting a little bit. There we go. Okay, that looks pretty good. And we look from here, that looks pretty good too. Again, it's not going to be perfect, but for the sake of this part, this looks like it works. Okay, and now for this guy, we want to work in the 2D plane. Again, we want to work in 2D planes as much as we can. We want to avoid 3D sketches unless we have to use them. So I'm going to make another plane that's going to be parallel to the front plane. And then that's going to be at this point. Great. And then I'm going to start drawing the sketch in there. Okay, so for this guy, I'm going to do the same thing, draw another sketch on this new plane. Use a spline tool. I'm going to attach it to this point, which I know sits on the plane, and arbitrarily drag it down there. And then I can adjust these control points to have it match the diameter a little bit better. Okay, that looks pretty good in that plane. Let's look at this plane. I probably want this also coming out at a 0-degree angle. So when I mirror it, it's going to be, it'll be flush with the other layer. And there is my other point. Again, it looks pretty good from, not as good from this plane, good from the right plane. Actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll bring it in a little bit. So let's just go back into our sketch and edit it slightly. I don't want this to be coincident. There we go. That looks a little bit better. Again, not perfect, but this is good so far. And then I just realized with this sketch, I'm also going to do the same with this angle. I'm going to make this at 0 degrees so that when I mirror it, again, it's going to be flush with the sketch that comes across. Okay, so we have those sketches in place. Now let's make some 3D sketches. I'll make the rim that goes around here, and that's going to come out of plane. That won't sit on any singular plane, so I need to use a 3D sketch for that. It's best to use 3D sketches by toggling between the different planes. So I'm going to just snap this sketch to there. And now I'm going to adjust what this sketch is going to look like. So let's go to our top view and start moving around these control points. Okay, that looks good from the top. Maybe from the bottom view, maybe we want to bring this down a little bit. Same here, we're gonna try to match this. Okay, that looks pretty good from the right, from the top, and from the front. Okay, so there is our first 3D sketch. Control B, we'll rebuild that. We're gonna make another 3D sketch, which is gonna bridge this gap. So we're gonna use our spline, click the beginning and the end, and then I'm gonna go back to my top view. What I'm gonna do here also is I'm gonna try to make this tangent to the previous. Sometimes this doesn't work, this time it does work. Okay, great. If the previous 3D sketch is a little too wonky and it can't find a tangency, then it might error on you, but in this case, it gave me something that works. So That actually works pretty well. So I'm going to keep that as is. Okay, and then I'm going to add one more 3D sketch to connect the back end. This guy to this guy. Let's go to my top plane, top view. Okay, and then this one, I'm gonna make it, again, you have some other relations here you can add for 3D sketches. So I want this line to be coming straight out in this direction, which is the x-axis if you look at this bottom left-hand coordinate system. So I want this to be along the x. So that's a constraint I can add. And that looks pretty good to me. That's a tough view to see, again, because this is the front, so that's not going to really give us any information. But I like that. Okay, so we have, let's hide these views. This is what our part looks like right now. We just have to add 2 more lines here in order to fill out the rest of our sketches. This guy, we're going to connect these 2 points, and then we're going to connect these 2 points. So let's do that. Now I have all of my sketches, and let's hide this plane as well. So great, I have all my sketches. Now let's start making some surfaces. So I'm going to go into my surfaces tab here. If you don't have this tab, then you can right click any of these and just add it. So right click surfaces, now you have a surfaces tab. You'll see a lot of these features here are very similar to the features you've already been working with. You have extrude surface, extrude boss, revolve surface. They work generally in the same way, but generally I would say you'll probably be using lofted surface and boundary surface 90% of the time. So I usually start with one. If it doesn't work, I'll try the other one, and then that'll usually work for me. So to start, I am going to model this part here. I'm going to add a surface to the front and just work my way down the part. So let's start with a lofted surface. It's very similar. You're going to start with, I'm going to loft this line to this line. I'm clicking close to the same point so that these green dots fall along the same, the same path. You don't want your surface twisting, which might happen in this case. So just click close to the same endpoint. And then the guide curve I'm going to use is this line. Great, so this is our first surface. You can see it has no mass properties. There are no mass properties associated with this. If I go to evaluate, I don't even have the option to say mass properties because we haven't created a solid yet. So I'm going to keep following the same process and fill in the rest of this part. So I created my first surface. Now let's try to use lofted surface again. Another good trick to use here is for this next surface, let's say I use a lofted surface. I'm going to go from here to here. And my guide curve, I'm going to use as this one. And we're also going to use this curve here. Make sure you click the sketch, not the actual edge of the surface. If I click the edge of the surface, what happens when I actually delete this? It's going to delete this other surface, and you don't want that. So in order to save yourself from this issue, when you make this surface, don't click edge. Actually go into the previous surface you made and select the sketch that the edge references, which is this guy right here. If I hover over each of these sketches, you'll see the lines will highlight in orange. So I'm going to click this guy, this sketch. So now if for some reason I didn't like the surface and I want to change it, if I delete it, it will not delete this other surface because it's not referencing the edge. It's referencing the sketch. So that's really important. Okay, so far lofted surface has worked for all of these. Let's keep going. Okay, so I have all of my surfaces now, and now I need to create a solid from this, because again, it is an empty part. So in order to do that, I need to seal it on all sides, so it looks like a solid. So I'm going to use a filled surface For this, I'm going to click all of the sketches. So here's the first one. Here's the second one. I want to seal this surface here, so I'm going to click all these sketches that will seal it. Here's the next one. There's another one. Okay, so now it created a yellow dotted line, which is good. And if I check this off, now I have a sealed surface. It's still empty. I have one more step I need to do, which is to knit all of the surfaces. So there's still no mask properties associated with this. So now if I go to knit, I'm going to highlight all of my surfaces, all 7 of them. I'm going to create a solid and merge entities. Check it off. And now I have a solid part. I can have mask properties and it looks great. And now one last step I have to do is to mirror it about the right plane. The body I'm going to mirror, just click the body, check it off, and there you have your final part. Then you can start to do things like adding colors to your surfaces and make it look a little bit more realistic. But that's the general process. You're going to make a bunch of sketches, and then you are going to make surfaces from the sketches, knit all of the surfaces, and create a solid. Thanks for watching.